Thank you.
Okay, my name is Joy Kovacs. I am an industrial psychologist and a former consultant with TriMet. And there are a few, let me move this a little bit, I'm echoing. There are a few safety-related issues that I wanted to bring, I guess, to the attention of the safety committee, but now Neil predominantly, pertaining to how operators are selected, hired, and trained at TriMet. I want to start with actually the bus operator job description, because any potential operator, this is going to be the first thing that they're going to see. And this is copied directly from TriMet's website. Number 1, provide accurate information to customers regarding fares, routes, schedules, operating roles. Number 2, assist disabled passengers with boarding and exiting the bus. Secure wheelchair clamps or safety belts as required. Number 3, operate a bus on specified routes according to established time schedules, follow district rules and policies, obey traffic laws. Number 4, develop and practice defensive driving skills to prevent vehicle or passenger accidents. That should have been number 1. I mean, the first two are pertaining to customer service, and we all agree that that's important. But if safety is going to be the value, the predominant concern, that needs to be tangible at every level of this organization and everything that the public may see. I mean, this is going to be the first thing that any person considering to be a bus operator is going to see. And what's this convey? Well, customer service is important, staying on time is important, and oh yeah, safety, that's important too. That needs to improve. Moving on from that, during the process by which bus operators are hired, they go through a multiple hurdle approach where they turn in their application, their driving record is reviewed, and there's one stage where they have a panel interview with maybe 3 or 4 panelists who are managers or other positions at TriMet. And I observed a few of these panel interviews in my time at TriMet, and there were a few things that I noticed that I think kind of sent up red flags. One was one candidate that the panelists, based on their criteria that they were grading this candidate, said they didn't pass. But then they all agreed that this person could probably do the job anyway, and so they passed them. Either the criteria that they're working with needs to be adjusted, maybe training the interviewers in this process so that they're all calibrated a bit, but that kind of thing shouldn't be happening. Either this person is qualified or isn't qualified to do the job. And then I'd actually want to transition into talking about the light rail training. I hadn't, in my time at TriMet, evaluated the bus operator training, but I did spend approximately 8 months evaluating the light rail training in detail. Just to give a little bit of background, even though bus operators can be any person in the public, whenever the bus operator position is open, you can go in, turn in an application, and start work as a bus operator. For light rail, you actually need to already be a bus operator at TriMet with at least 6 months of experience. When a bus operator turns in their application, the first thing that happens is actually a work record review by Human Resources. And it's during this work record review that HR will look at their time loss, oversleeps, customer service complaints, rule violations, etc. Another thing that they look at during this are the preventable accidents over the last 2 years. And this is something that I know has come up a few times in these safety meetings. What do we mean by a preventable accident? Does that mean hitting a mirror? Does it mean hitting a curb? Does it mean hitting a person? The reason why I bring this up, and this is actually something that I've been sitting in the back of these safety committee meetings trying to decide if this is something I should talk about or not. In January of 2008, there was an incident similar to the one with Sandy Day, where a bus operator made a left turn into a crosswalk where there was a pedestrian, and that pedestrian was struck. The pedestrian lost her leg as a result of this collision. This was January of 2008. In the fall of 2008, the operator of that bus was cleared for light rail training. And I don't want to say this to badmouth that operator. I have no personal issue with this operator at all. I don't want to make it sound like I do, but I'm not sure that that was the most appropriate thing that in this work record review, when HR conducted it, they're allowed one preventable accident in the last 2 years, and that could mean something as severe as striking a pedestrian in a crosswalk, and that pedestrian now has a debilitating injury as a result. I don't think that's appropriate, and I think that we not only need to look at what operators are doing when they're out there in the field, in these buses, in these trains, but what are all the steps leading up to that? How are they being trained? How are they being selected? Who are the people doing this training and selecting? one of the things that I saw when I worked with light rail training, and just a little bit of background on how the light rail training program works, because I don't know if the committee would have really been exposed to that or not, and I imagine the public hasn't. Light rail training is a 7-week program. The first 3 weeks are mostly classroom training with also some operating time. And at the end of each week, on each Friday, there is a written test that operators must get 80% on in order to pass to the next week. The 4th week is graveyard week. This is done at night, and it's all operation, no classroom training. The test at the end of this week is a practical test where operators have to take a train from one yard to the other without instruction. And then the 5th week of light rail training is the first time that operators will be operating trains in revenue service, again some classroom time, and a test at the end of this week. And if operators get 80% or better on the test at the end of the 5th week, they're considered certified. One of the things that I'd actually had in my notes for what I was preparing to talk about today was at one of the first safety meetings that I attended, Mr. David Sale had said, certified in what? How do we know that when you say this person got an 80%, that means that they're ready to operate this equipment, that they're prepared to operate this equipment? What does that 80% even mean? And I thought it was interesting that he had mentioned that point again today. That had been one of my concerns when I worked with the rail training department, is that 80% is an arbitrary number. And I want to tie that back to the bus training as well, and not only bus training, but also the supervisor training and the controller training. Because in all of those cases, this pass rate that is set for operators to either continue on to the next stage of training or get their certification, it's arbitrary. And I mean, I understand, of course, that we'll make the assumption that if you do well in training, you'll do well on the job. But there needs to be something better than just this kind of assumption, like why 80%, why not 90%, why not 75%? We don't know where that cutoff is. On a similar note, with the content of this training, I had gone through the rail training records going all the way back to the first classes in the mid-'80s,
Wow.
up through the light rail operators that were certified at the beginning of 2009. And I do want to say that the current training staff in there, supervisors Bob Lynch, Marilyn Pomblad, and manager Jim Strickland, I think have done a very, very good job at improving in the way that this rail training has been done. I've looked at some of the older questions, and there are things like, how many speakers are there on the outside of the train? Who cares? You know, that's not relevant to safety. That has nothing to do with operating the trains. And the training staff that's in there now, I think if you talk with them about this, you'll find that they're extremely amenable to improving the way that light rail training is conducted. I'm going to hazard a guess, just based on my experience with the rail training, that bus training, you're going to find the same thing. Like, these people want to improve. They want to have the safest program possible. I mean, obviously nobody wants to see these accidents happening. Accidents, incidents, collisions, you know, whatever the term is that we want to use for that. But I still think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done with how these operators are trained, how they're certified. And the same thing with recertification. Like, I know that rail operators are recertified every year, and that was one of the K&J recommendations to recertify bus operators. But again, we need to do the same thing. Like, okay, you give them a test. What's the content of that test? What are you basing it on? How are you determining what is going to be the pass rate on this test? And what does that mean? Does it mean that maybe somebody who was borderline is safe anyway? Maybe they're not so safe? I think this is something that we really need to look at. And I'm hoping that the conclusion of the safety committee as it stands doesn't mean that there's this conclusion of this concerted effort on focus on safety at TriMet, because I think that needs to continue. I don't think we can just say, okay, we're safe, and call it a night. I think we need to keep examining these things because, you know, I spent a lot of time talking with rail operators out there, and one thing that I heard from so many of them, even the ones who've been out there for like 14, 15 years, have decades worth of safe driving experience, both at rail and at bus, and they tell me the one day that they think they've got nothing to learn, they think they're set, is the day that they are going to be in an incident. You know, if a day goes by and they feel like, you know, I didn't really learn anything today, they wonder what important thing did they miss. And I think that it's not just the operators that need to have this attitude, it is every level of TriMet. And one other thing, just kind of as a tangent, I was very glad to see that the K&J report had recommended an additional week at least in the rail operator training program, because that was something that I had recommended as well. I mean, I would be happy to talk about this in more detail with Neil, with any member of the safety committee, any member of the public, because this is something that I do feel very strongly about. Like, I don't think we can just say, okay, the safety committee meetings are done, it's the end of October, let's all just move on and go on with our lives. This is something that's important to me, and I mean, I don't even have a horse in this race the same way that Darla Sturdy or David Sale or anybody else who's been injured in one of these incidents at TriMet has been. But I think this is something that we still need to focus on, and if there's anything that I can do to help, any questions I can answer, anybody who wants to talk to me, I'm more than happy to.
Thank you. You do have a horse.
Sorry?
You do have a horse. No. Thank you very much.